Hello, welcome to Sand VFX. Today, in this lesson, I will show you how to create this crystal scene in 3ds Max and render it using Corona. So this is a fairly simple scene, but we have a lot of ground to cover. So without further ado, let's get started. First thing first, let's go ahead and model our crystals. In order to model this crystal, I will be using a free script called Debris Maker. This is the script. This is absolutely free. You can head to this website and download it. I'm gonna put the link on the description below. So I've already installed this, so I'll just go ahead and run the script. And this is a fairly simple script. All I have to do is change this to crystal, and then I can I'll just go ahead and turn on mesh and then generate. And it should take about a couple seconds and you get these crystals. How cool is that? Now, we want to change some settings and create some variations. You can change the number of sides, you can change the heights. There's a whole bunch of things. I would say go ahead, play around with it and try to create 5 or 6 different variations and just generate. One thing I would say is this script creates lots of empty nodes on particle flow. So if you go into your scene explorer, here you will see a lot of these unnecessary nodes that could slow down your system, especially if you're going to create a lot of variation. So after creating every crystal, I would say go ahead and delete all these pflow nodes so that it doesn't slow down your system later. Okay, on this display, all of these, just delete those. And we only had 2 objects now. That's it. I'll let you play with this and create some variations, and then we'll start setting up the rest of the scene. Okay, now that we have generated our crystal, let's go ahead and create our surface and start setting up our scene. I'll just create a simple plane. I'll give it a width of about 850 millimeters and roughly about 2600 on the length. Okay. I'm just gonna center it quickly, and let me give it some segments, 50, because we'll be using displace modifier later. Let me change the wire color to something more brighter. Okay. Now what I want to do is quickly set some of the rocks, just so that I can quickly set up a composition. Okay, so I'll check this rock here. Let's say this one's our hero crystal. I'm just going to scale this one up a little bit and put it somewhere around here maybe. Now I want to take another one, make a copy, and I'll put these in foreground. So it'll be somewhere around here. Just make a copy roughly for now. Doesn't really matter. That's fine. And now I want to create some of them for the background. I'll copy it there. Actually, let me copy the other one. Copy it, put it in the background, and just scale this one up. Maybe make another copy as well. Copy. That's fine. Now we'll go ahead and set up our camera. So if you head into the camera and create a physical camera, or I think I'll just go ahead and use a Corona camera. And I'll put the camera somewhere around here. So if I hit C, I can go to the camera view. Now what I want to do is, let's go to the camera settings. Let's check that. I'll change the focal length to something around 100 mm. Let me pull back a little bit. I'll turn off the target because I don't really need the target for now, so that I can just move around like easily. So basically what I'm trying to do here is trying to get these crystals in the foreground, mid-ground, and then the background. Okay, I'll just position these slightly, something like that. I'll push this one forward as well. So we have this message. This one's fine. Okay, well, we'll set up it better a little bit later. This is just so that we have something to start with. Okay, now I want to go into the render settings and let's set up the size of our render. I'm just going to go with Anamorphic, and I'll set this to 1920. Sorry, I think I got the wrong one. Yeah, I need this one here, 1920 by 817. Okay, so basically we'll be using an anamorphic lens. I'll tell you what that means later when we get into depth of field and bokeh. So if I hit Shift F now, it'll give me the save frame. So that's basically what's going to be rendered. Now it'll be easier for us to compose our shot, and we'll only be placing all the geometries wherever there's going to be camera view. Okay, now let's go ahead and create our surface. I'm going to add a turbo smooth on this and add some segments. We're going to need quite a bit of segments there. Then I'll go ahead and add a UVW map. Let's go into the perspective view. Alright, now let me open Material Editor. And I'm going to drop in a bitmap node. And I'll go ahead and browse into my texture map folder. So I'll be using the textures from polygon.com. I'll share the link in the description, so if you want, you can go ahead and download it from their website. Unfortunately, these are not free, so I'm not allowed to share it with you guys. So I'll just open up this one here. Okay, and let me add in a displace modifier. Displace, and I'm going to drag and drop this onto the map. Okay, now if I increase the strength, we should start seeing these rocky detail into the surface. Okay, we don't want a lot, maybe around 10 mm. Let's look through our camera view. It's probably a bit too much. Let's go about 8. And let me go to the UV map, and I'm going to scale the map down. So that way these details will be smaller. Might take a while because we have a lot of geometry there. That's actually not working. Okay, I think I know why. You need to go back into the displace and make sure you tick use existing mapping. That way the UV mapping will work. Okay, so let's go ahead and change this a little bit. Go to the camera. So setting up the camera gives us opportunity to look through the camera view every time we make some changes, so we know exactly what we're seeing. Okay, I'll do something like that. Should be alright. Okay, cool. Now I want to go ahead and set up the rest of the scene. So we'll be copy pasting these rocks fair bit. Okay, so let me scale this one up a little bit. I'm gonna put these really far. The reason for that is the further the object, we will have more depth in the scene. So they will be more blurred when we introduce depth of field later, as well as when we have fog in the scene. The geometry that are further is gonna look lighter than the ones in the foreground. So I'm just going to make a few more copies here. Just make sure you rotate them, have various scale. Let's take this one. So this is basically where you keep playing. Okay. One of the important thing is basically make sure you keep foreground, mid-ground, and the background separate. Just play around accordingly. Because this is our hero element, we're not going to put a lot of bigger elements around it. We want just this piece to be the centerpiece and this piece to be in focus, so we don't want to distract it with other bigger pieces around it. So we'll put only the smaller ones around that later. Create a few more copies here. I'll use another one here so that we get some variation in the scene. Scale it up. So now the further the geometries are, you want to scale it up a bit more, otherwise they're going to be very tiny. Something like that. Okay. For now, I'll leave it there. And as you can see, all of these crystals are flying at the moment. There's no surface. We will go ahead and create just a simple plane without any subdivision. This way we save a lot of memory on these surface. We won't have high detail surface everywhere. So I'll set the segments to 1, 1. Yeah. Okay, let's go ahead and create some textures for our rocks. I'll open up the material editor. I'm just going to drag and drop some maps in here. So this one is a rock gray 009. I'll have the link on the description below. Or if you don't want to buy these textures, you can use any other rock textures. That's totally fine. Okay, I'll drag a corona material and connect this into the diffuse slot. I'm going to bring in a normal map as well, and then let's go down to corona normal and connect this. And I want to add gamma to the input and then connect this to the bump map. Let's go and adjust some settings here. I think I'll set the bump to about 2. We'll see that later when we add some lights and do some test render and see if the bump is too much. But for now, I'll leave it at 2. Okay, let's go ahead and do a color correction node. And I'm going to connect this map here. I'll reduce the saturation, go to the advanced tab and increase the brightness. Let me actually reduce the lift, increase the pivot, so that I get this really contrasty map that I can use on reflection glossiness. Okay, and I'll go ahead and increase the reflection to 1. Let's increase this a little bit. Set this to about 200. Something like that should be fine. Okay, let's go ahead and apply these. Just going to select all of it. All these and assign material to selection. And I'll show these in the viewport. We're not going to worry too much about unwrapping the geometries because most of these will be out of focus and you'll barely notice any discrepancies on them. So I'll just leave the unwrapping for now. We might do some basic UV mapping on our hero geometry, but we'll look at that later. I want to go ahead and assign these textures to these other pieces as well. I'll just go assign material to selection. That should be good. Okay, now let's go ahead and create those smaller rocks with Forest Pack. Okay, let's go i2 software, Forest Pro, and I'm going to click my surface, and it says to use the camera clipping. I'll just hit yes for that. Let's go to the modify tab. Okay, now let's go ahead and use custom object, and I'll pick one of these geometries here, probably use this one, and hit yes. Let's go into the distribution tab and reduce these units. So the lower the number, there's going to be more objects in the scene. I'll set this to about 20,000. As you can see, we see it there. I'll reduce that to 10,000, maybe even more, 5,000. Okay, let's go down to the transform tab, and I want to turn on random rotation, and the default value should work totally fine. Enable the random scale. I'll set the minimum to 50 and maximum to about 200. Let's go back up into the distribution and reduce this further. 3,000. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead into the area, and I'll add a new paint area, and I'll do exclusion. Okay, now I can paint the areas where I don't want this scatter to happen. So I'll pick the paintbrush. This is pretty tiny at the moment, so hit this brush option. I'm going to increase the size to about 500. That's too much. Probably 200. Okay, now I want to brush these areas where these are hero objects. And let's go ahead and brush a few of these areas here. I don't want any distraction basically around here. Actually. Yeah. So accidentally, if you erase too many stuff, you can go back to the eraser and then get those areas back. Okay. That should do the trick for now. I'll go ahead and make a copy of this forest pack. So just Control V while the forest pack is selected. Oh, it's frozen. And make a copy of this. Then let's go down to the surface. It's frozen. Let's give it a little bit of time to load. Okay, let's go down to surface. Surface, and I'll delete this one and add the other plane that we had. Okay, yeah. Now for this one, I'm going to change the scale. So if you go into the general tab, and I'm going to change the global scale to about 250. So as you can see, anything around here is much bigger than the one in the foreground. Okay. Now it looks like this is not using the camera, so I'm going to, let me just expand this a little. Okay, that's good. Now let's go down to the camera, and I'm going to pick my camera here, so that way it's not scattering everywhere, and it will save some memory basically. Okay, now that we've scattered our rocks, I want to go back and revisit our camera angle now. So let me isolate some of these objects here, this floor, and also our camera, and isolate that. Okay, let's hit Shift F to bring back the save frames, and let me go to this plus sign, configure viewports, save frame. I'm going to just punch these values basically for now, 66 and 66. Apply. So this is basically going to give us the rule of thirds, which is a basic rule of composition, one of the rule. So if you don't know anything about composition, I will highly recommend you guys to watch some photography tutorial. There are a lot of information out there on how to compose a scene. Some basic rules like the rule of thirds, rule of horizon. So we'll just use two of the rules here today. The first one being rule of thirds. So basically with that rule, anything that's your focal element, you can put that to one of these 4 points. which is going to be visually pleasing. The other one is the horizon. So if I go ahead, select my camera, our camera has this option called show horizon line. So as you can see, this black line is our horizon line. So this horizon line can either be on the bottom third or the top third. In our case, we'll keep that on the bottom because we have a lot of rocks in our background, which is pretty interesting, so we don't want to cover all of that. So let's go into the left view. I'll turn our target back on, click on the target, and basically move it up until the horizon lines up. It doesn't have to be 100% accurate, but something close. Okay, now I'm going to adjust this focal element, or our main crystal, a little bit, and trying to put it more to match it up. And now I have to adjust our foreground element as well so that it's visible in the camera. Okay, move this. Now I'm going to copy a few of them just so that we have more interesting stuff happening around in the foreground. Now in the end, they're all going to be very blurred, so we're not going to see any details on them. They'll pretty much be just blurry. But we want some visual interest happening in the foreground as well. That's why we're just trying to create these extra elements. Something like that should be fine. Okay. Now while we're at the camera, I'll go into the camera and pick our focal point as well. So if I enable the depth of field, now I can override the focus and pick the object. So basically, which is going to be this central crystal, which will also change the material later to be glowing red crystal. Okay. With that, what happens is anything around that crystal will be in focus, and the other areas is going to be out of focus. And I'm going to set my f-stop to around 4 for now. We'll check that later when we do some test renders. Okay. Okay, now that we are done with setting up our cameras, we'll go ahead and scatter some tiny little crystals around the surface. We'll be using Corona Scatter this time. I just want to show you guys a different method to scatter different objects on a surface. So you don't have to use Forest Back. You can use the Corona Scatter that comes with Corona. Okay, I'll go into the Corona Scatter here on our standard Corona Scatter. Now I just want those small single crystals, so I will extract one from here. Just go to the element, click the element, and shift drag it to detach it from there, and clone to object. Now I want to go ahead and center the pivot for this, and I'll rotate this geometry to be straight. Roughly, it doesn't have to be perfect. Let me isolate this with Alt Q, and I want to position the pivot to the bottom because that will be used when you scatter this onto the surface. And as you can see, there is this pivot which is rotated really weirdly because we rotated the crystal. So I'll go ahead and reset the X form. If you go into the utilities, reset X form and reset select. And I'll convert this to edit poly. Okay, now let's go back. I'm going to select that crystal, the Corona Scatter, and our surface, and isolate that again. Go to the Corona Scatter, and I'll add my surface here, and I'll add that crystal here. And we should be able to see those things scattered. As you can see, all these boxes. Now by default, it displays as box, but I can go down to viewport display and set it to display as a full mesh. But I think the box is fine for now, so we don't want our viewport to lag. I'm going to add some variation in the rotation, 360. Probably add slight variation on the X rotation as well, so they are tilted a little bit, maybe 20. Some variation on the scale. I think I'll just put it to like 20, 30. Yeah, I don't want these to be too big. That should be fine. See, that's how easy it was. You can adjust the count if you want. If you need more scatter, you can just change the count. But I think somewhere around 1100 should be fine. Okay, now that we've done all this boring part, let's go ahead and set up our lighting and start doing some test renders. So the main light we're going to use is the Corona Sun. Just create a Corona Sun quickly. Just drag and drop. Give it some height. Yeah, I think it's too high for now. I'll just lower it a little bit. Okay. And let's go to the Modify tab, and I will add Corona Sky on the environment, which will basically add the environment here. And I'm also going to change the exposure control to no exposure control, so I can use Corona's frame buffer exposure control. Let's go to our render setup. And on our main camera view, I'm going to lock the viewport, go to the scene and hit Start Interactive. As you can see, the scene is super bright at the moment. Let's go to the post and reduce the exposure. Okay, something like that. Nice. Now we have a lot of these stuff here in the foreground, so we might have to paint that out a little bit, but that's alright for now. Just reduce it down further, something like that. Now that's a very good base, and I also think the depth of field is a little bit too much, so I'm going to increase the f-stop on our camera. Let's go back to the camera, select camera, and change the f-stop. Now if you don't know what this f-stop does, so basically, let me just isolate this and the camera. Okay. Well, actually, that's not the one I want. Okay, let's go back. Select the main geometry here. Okay, that's the one. Now, as you can see, that object is our focal object. Now, based on the f-stop, if you have a smaller f-stop, that means only a small area around that is going to be in focus. Now, as you start increasing this number, the more and more area starts getting in focus. So it's basically our basic camera rule. It's how our camera works, the aperture in the camera works. If you guys want to get into rendering, I highly recommend you to learn the basic of photography, like ISO, f-stop, shutter speed, see how it works, see how when you take a photo with various settings, what changes. That's going to really help you understand all of these things. For now, I'm just going to increase that from 4 to something like 8 and do another quick test render. So I'm just going to click and start IR, which is going to run the interactive rendering again. Yeah, now a much more area is now in focus. That's good. Okay, now as you can see, there's like these objects are blocking our view to our main hero element there. So I'm just going to stop, go back to my forest pack object. I'm going to brush off some of these geometries in the foreground here. Let's go to the area. Go back to our paint and then start painting now. Okay, probably something along this line here. We don't want anything there. That's good. Let me go ahead and save this file. We haven't saved since the beginning, so save as. Okay, I'll just save scene_01. Okay, now let's go ahead and set up our volumetrics. Let's open up the material editor. I'm going to drag and drop a Corona volume material here, and let's open up render settings, and I'll drag this down to the global volume material. Sorry. And make it an instance. Okay, so we'll set up a basic setting here, something around 2500 for distance. And let's change the scattering color to something blue, like that, and change the directionality to 0.5. And I'll click the single bands only. Let's go ahead and see how it renders. Now, as you can see, the scene has gotten a lot darker. So now I can increase up the exposure a bit. And as I was telling you before, the more you layer these objects further, you can see how they're blurred, and it helps to give you the sense of depth. So you have these objects in the foreground, then the mirrored ground and the background. And they are easily separated. Even with the fog, we can see how there's no details on these that are really far. We can see some details and highlights on the ones that are more closer to us. That's pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and turn on emission and set this to something like 500. Now, as you can see, it's super bright. I'm going to increase, I'll change the emission color. A little bit of a cyan. And then increase the distance to about 1500. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now I just want to put some textures on the surface here. Let's go ahead, create a Corona material. And I will drag a texture. Again, I'm going to use another texture from Polygon. Which is the Rock Dark 010. And I'm going to put that on the diffuse slot. I'll grab another map, which is a AO map, and I'll put that into reflection color. Increase the reflection level to 1. Change the glossiness to something like 0.6. I don't want the surface to be super reflective. I can drag the same one into the bump, so we get some little extra details there. I'm just going to apply this to the surface. Let's do another quick test render. Yeah, that's all right. We barely see any details there, so it's not going to be a big deal for us. But we can always go ahead and keep adjusting that, or we can even add some texture on it later on in post-production. That is fine for now. I just want to show you a quick little feature of Corona that I really love, which is the light mix, if you have never used this before. So the quickest way to set that up is from the render setup. If you go into the scene and there's a setup light mix, I just hit the setup light mix, generate, and I'm going to start the interactive rendering again. Now what it's going to do is it's going to list you any light source that is in the scene in here, and I can just adjust this without having to re-render your scene. If I just stop this, I can just increase the environment brightness. I can even turn it off totally. I can play with the sun. I can turn off the sun, and this gives you so easy access to look at. You can just play around and try to get this looking right. I can change the color of the light, make it more warmer if I want, or anything. In our case, I think whatever we've got is pretty good, so I'm not really worried about adjusting these for now. Let's go ahead and set up our crystal material now. It's going to be pretty simple as well. Let's go to the material editor. I'm going to copy the rock material that we made earlier. I'm going to shift drag, create another one. And let me assign that to my object quickly. Okay, let me just isolate that object. Yeah. Drag and drop there. Turn on the viewport display. I'll go down here into Volumetrics tab. I'm going to set the distance to 15 and the directionality to 0.5, and I'm going to change the scattering color to be red. Let me update the preview. Oh yeah, we just need to increase the refraction. Now you can see the red in there. Let's go ahead and do some quick test render, see how it looks. Start interactive. We should start seeing some nice red color in our rock there. Yeah, there we go. I can just set up the region so I can see it a little bit better. That's nice. Now the thing is, wherever the light hits, it's going to be brighter, and wherever it's in shadow, it's going to be darker, as well as wherever the mesh is dense, it's going to be darker. Okay. I'll just go ahead and create some variation on this red color here. So let's go back to the material editor. I'm going to go ahead and drag a corona color. Make this a red color. Now make a copy of this and change this one to be a little bit slight different red color. I'll drag mix map, put this two into color 1 and color 2, and drag a noise map. And put that into the mixer map. Okay, let's play with the noise a little bit. Change the low to 0.5, change the high to 0.6 so that we get more contrast here. And you can already see how we have these two different colors of red. I'll change this to fractal and increase the levels so we get more detail there. And I'll increase the size to about maybe 1200. And I can now plug this one into the corona volume scatter color. So that way it's not going to be one red, as you can see here as well. Somewhere it'll be a little bit darker, somewhere it'll be brighter. Let's go ahead and do another quick test render. Now at the moment our image looks really flat, but that's okay. We still need to play with some settings here in the post, or you can add all these contrasts later on in post-production. But I always like to play a little bit here in the corona frame buffer. So I'm going to increase the filmic shadows, which is going to get some contrast there for us. Let's change the white balance. I'm gonna go around 6,000, up 6,000. I can add in some contrast here, maybe 2, 3. Let me go into the LUT, and I'm going to enable the LUT. And the basic one is, the first one looks pretty good. I normally just go ahead and circle through it until I find something I like. This one's pretty good. Yeah, it's nice for us. Can increase the saturation a little bit. Can even add some curves here. So put down the shadows, get some highlights up. Seems pretty good. Now this crystal material is not going to illuminate any light. So we're going to do a little cheat here and create an extra geometry around here that's going to cast some lights around our scene. Okay, let's go ahead and I'll go to the top view, select our crystal here, and I'm going to create a little cylinder. With some height. Now I don't need any segments. I go to edit poly. I'm going to delete the top and bottom geometry. Delete that. Select the top bit. I'm going to scale that up a little bit. This up. Okay, now we'll just add a corona light material to this. Just drag a corona light material, make it a red color, to intensity, assign it. Now I'm going to turn off the visible directly, and visible is reflection. So that way we won't see this really bright geometry there. Let's do another quick test render. Okay, now you can see that light is not bright enough. So what I'm going to do, rather than adjusting the brightness of the light and re-rendering, I'll go to the render element, add in a new light select element, and I'm going to pick that object here. Okay. Now I can just adjust that from the light mix. I'm also going to rename this to light. Let it render for a little bit and then I'll stop it. Alright, let's go ahead and increase that. You can see it's increasing, but it's not going that far. So let's tweak the material actually. I'm going to set some directionality to it so it travels a little bit further. Yeah, so the problem with the light mix is it can only adjust the brightness and the color of the light, can't really adjust any other parameters. So if it's like directionality or any of these other properties, you'll have to re-render it. That's the limitations. Increase this to about 500, maybe 300. Yeah, that's, I think, is pretty good. I think I'll turn on visible and reflection here. Adjust this accordingly, maybe. That looks about right. I'm seeing some empty gaps here in the background, so I'm going to copy a few of these rocks around to avoid these big empty space there. And also I'll add some more variation to these forest back scatter so that we get some more interesting result there. Stop this, go to the top view, Let's copy these geometries around. Just make it instance, it's fine. If it's exactly same geometry, you can always make it an instance, which will basically save on memory when rendering. And let's go to this forest back here. I'm also going to reduce the count for that because we don't need that many. Let's go down to the distribution first. Change this to about 5,000, maybe even 10,000. Okay, and let's go to the global scale. Increase the scale to 350. Now I'll go down to transform. For the scale, I'll set this to about 30 and 300. Maybe not 10 and 250. Okay, that's about right. That should be fine. Now you can go ahead and play with these. You can try to set up a different kind of composition, play with the geometries in foreground and background, and try to get something interesting. I'll leave you guys to play with that a little more. Let's go ahead and create some pollen particles that's gonna flow around in the foreground. Okay, now the particles generally are very slow to work with high poly geometries, so I'm going to create a simple plane so that we can emit our particles from low poly geometry. Let me create a plane there, something like that. Bring it up a little, right above our surface. I'm going to right click, object properties, and turn off renderable so that it doesn't render. I'm going to create a new particle system, PF source. Let's open the particle view. And I'll drag and drop the position object and replace the position icon and pick our geometry. I want to generate lots of particles before the scene even starts, so I'm going to do the image start from -100 and stop it at 0. So we already have some particles flowing in the scene. Now they are going below the surface, so I'm going to go to the speed and reverse. So they are flowing above. Okay, that's good. I'm going to reduce the speed down to about 20 so that they're not flying too much. Very subtle movement. Let's go ahead and go to the shape, change that to sphere 20-sided. I'm going to go to display, change that to geometry. Now you can see the sphere in the scene. Now it's obviously too big, so we'll change the size to about 5 mm. Turn on the scale and reduce that down. I can increase some variation. Reduce that further. I'll set the birth amount to be around 500. It's probably too much. About 250 should be fine. I'm going to increase the speed a little bit. 30. Give it some variation, about 5. Should be fine. Now we're going to create some wind turbulence. So let's go to the forces, create a wind. Now we're not going to have any strength to it. We'll just give it some turbulence, so 0.05. And change the scale to 0.001. I'm going to set the frequency to 1. So that's just a random settings I just punched in. I will add that force to the scene and then see if I need to adjust that accordingly. So let's drag a force node and add our wind. Okay, let's play. You can see we've got some nice turbulence around. I might increase the turbulence a bit, 0.1. I think it's pretty chaotic at the moment. Let's change the frequency to 2. Increase that a bit more. Yeah, so now you see they change the direction much more. Okay, now it is really chaotic, but we're going to fix that with the drag. Just make a drag node there and add that to the force. What it does, it just gives the particles a little bit of resistance so they don't move as much. Now I can just change the speed back down, maybe to 20. That's not too bad, I think. Okay, now we'll just create a simple material for this. We'll drag a material static node, go to our material editor, create a corona material, give it about 200 white, and I'm going to change the translucency to 1, and that should be fine. I'm going to add some refraction to it as well, 0.2, and I can just drag that into the material static. Good, let's go ahead and see how it looks in our render. Okay, I think this is looking pretty good. Now, one thing I mentioned at the beginning that we'll be doing anamorphic LEDs, which means the bokeh are going to be a little bit stretched. Let me go into the Google and show you what I mean. So in Google, if you type in anamorphic lens, you'll see all these images where the bokeh or these DOF, they are stretched. Okay, that's how anamorphic lens work. The bokeh gets stretched a little bit. So we're going to simulate that here in Corona as well. So we'll just go into the Corona camera. And under bokeh, we will override the bokeh and we'll use, circular is fine. Okay, we'll just change the anisotropy to negative 0.3. Let's go back and do some test render. And now these circles, they should be a little bit stretched. Yeah, as you can see, they are now a little bit stretched. Just a little extra detail to give that cinematic look. One thing I don't really like is this red light that's reflecting on the surface. That's too bright, so I'm just going to go back to my material and turn off visible and reflection again. I don't really like that, so that should be fine. Let's do another quick test render and we'll set up our render passes and get ready for the final render. Let's go ahead and set up the render settings for the final render. We're going to add some render elements here. I'll just add some of these essential ones. And I'm going to add a C masking ID and wire color. Let me go ahead and add in another. I'll add a C text map and Z depth. Okay, so for Z depth, we need to set up the minimum Z and maximum Z. So the way I figured how much value to put in there is by using a tape. So if I go into the tape and I just measure it from the camera, see how far the distance is up to my focal point. You can see it on the length here, which is 900. And let's see how far it goes up to this. That's 25,000 roughly. Okay, I think 25,000 is fine. We'll just set this to 0 and 25,000. And then for the C-text map, I'll just go into the node map and add in a Corona AO map. Let's open up Material Editor. I'll drag and drop this here as an instance so that I can adjust this. Probably set the distance to about 50 mm. Well, let's go to the scene. I'm going to set the noise limit to about 3. It totally depends on your scene based on the size of your image. You might have to lower it, or you can even get away with higher noise limit. Change the denoising to Corona high quality, and the default value is pretty good. Now, for now, we'll only do a still render, so it doesn't matter if we use a still frame USD cache, but if you're doing an animation, you want to make sure you do the USD cache as animation, otherwise you'll get a lot of flicker in your scene. That's pretty much it. We can now go ahead and hit render, and I'll see you guys in compositing in After Effects. Alright, now that we have finished our render, I just saved them out as EXR, and we'll do a quick compositing / grading here in After Effects. I've already loaded all the passes that I need, so let me go ahead and drag my light mix and create a new composition. Now I'll just drag and drop a few other passes, so let's get the reflection first. I'll set this blending mode to screen, and I'll maybe reduce the opacity. You can control the amount of reflection you want. If you want more than that, you could just go ahead and add in levels to the reflection, and then you can just increase it up even more. But that's not what we want, so I will just leave that out. Something about that looks right. Okay, let's go back. I'll grab the refraction pass, do the same with it, screen. Just go ahead and play around a little bit, basically. Let me bring in the translucency. Let's do the same thing with it. Reduce it down a little bit. Now I want to get this text map, which we generated in Corona. This one is basically just going to add a little bit of detail onto those edges and corners. For this one, I'll set the blending mode to multiply. Now, if I turn that on and off, you can see all these areas get a bit more darker and gives a bit more detail to it. I'll reduce the opacity, probably something up to 80, and that looks about right. Let me grab the environment map here, set that one to screen, and reduce the opacity. Now this one's got some blue tint to it, so I'm going to change that color to more greenish tone. I'll just go ahead and drop in a hue and saturation, and then just change the hue until it matches up. As you can see, that seems fine. Let's go back to our passes here. I'm going to drop a Volumetrics node and do the screen for that as well. Okay. Let me drag and drop my sun pass, because this one's got some nice highlights around these objects here. So let's go to screen, see. And I definitely don't want this to affect my crystal here, because it starts washing out the colors. So one way to avoid that would be to use some masks, but unfortunately I don't think I created proper masks for that. So since this is just a still, I'll just go ahead and mask it out. Now obviously you want to render out some mask elements for this kind of stuff. Unfortunately I didn't save it out, so I'm just going to do this. Now it's not going to be perfect, I know, but for the sake of this tutorial, now masking is not going to be very useful if your camera is moving, unless you want to do rotoscoping every frame by frame, which I'm pretty sure you want to avoid. Do that, almost there. Just trying to do it pretty roughly. Alright, that's good. And I'll go ahead and hit M double and then increase the feather on this, and then change this to subtract. Now as you can see, the sunlight is only affecting the rest of the scene, not the crystal. I can reduce the opacity on this one a little bit as well. Sounds about right. Okay, now I want to go ahead and add in an adjustment layer. Let me go ahead and drag a curves node. I want some contrast to the scene. So I'm going to bring the shadows down, pull up the highlights. Now you can already see the contrast is so much better. Okay, now I definitely want more color here on the crystal. So I'll go ahead and drag in once again the refraction pass, which was our crystal. And I'll go ahead and give it some levels. I'm trying to boost the colors a little bit more. Okay, and then set that to add mode. Now that's probably a bit too bright. Let's play with the levels a little bit. Okay, that looks about right. And I'm gonna make a copy of this. Hit Control and D. And on this one, I'm going to add in some blur. So Gaussian blur. And this will give us some nice glow. As I start increasing this, you can see some glow there. Now, one of the issues we're having is like we're getting this bluish glow, which I don't really like. I want just the red tone to glow. So let's go ahead and isolate this layer here. I'm going to go and add in a hue and saturation node. And then I'll turn on colorize. And then as you can see, we already have that red color, but I'll probably swap it a little bit. Increase the saturation by a lot. And let's go ahead and see how it looks. Now you can see it's got some nice red glow to it. Let's go ahead and reduce the opacity a little bit. Looks about right. Okay, I'll get rid of this. Let's see. Yeah, I'll get rid of these levels here. Alright. Now I'm going to go ahead and pre-comp all of this. This is going to be our basic render passes. Render pass comp. Let's go back here, and now I'm going to create another adjustment layer for color grading. As you see, and I'll go ahead and drag in a Volumetrics color. I'll go to the basic correction. Let's just play around a little bit here. I'm going to increase the temperature a little bit. So the tint is basically, if you go negative value, it's going to give you more green. If you go positive value, it's going to get more magenta to it. So I want a bit more green here, so I'll just reduce that down a little bit. I'm going to reduce the exposure a little bit because I think it's a little too bright. And increase the contrast a little more. let's bring up some highlights. Turn the shadows down. Bring the whites back up a little bit. That looks alright. I'm going to add a little vignetting effect, so I'll just create a new solid with black color. Okay, and I'm going to create a ellipse mask. Let's go here and do subtract. Hit M twice. Sorry, yeah, and then get it to feather a little bit. I'm going to increase the expansion. And then set the mode to screen. No, sorry. Should be overlay or maybe soft light. Or you could just leave it to normal. That should be fine. Okay, a little bit of that vignetting. Now, because this is an anamorphic lens that we use, in real life you'll get some chromatic aberration in the scene. So let's go ahead and try and add that. I have this free plugin called Quick Chromatic Aberration, which works perfectly fine. So I'll just drag and drop that into my CC layer. Okay, and I think you can already see these little red and green line, which is basically what chromatic aberration is. Gives that little bit of extra detail and cinematic look to your scene. I'm going to go ahead and add a final color balance here. Color balance, and then let's just go ahead and play a little bit with this. I'm going to go ahead and increase the green on the shadows a little bit here. Maybe on the mid-tone. Reduce it down so we get more of that red popping. That's fine. Let's see. Okay, we got a little more red, a little more brighter red on the crystal there. Let's go ahead and reduce the blue a little bit. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. Okay, now I think that's all we've got. You can play more with the colors. You can use different colors. Over here we used green and red, which is a complementary color. That's why the red complements the green. You can use other different color combinations. There are analog colors, triad colors. You can try out a bunch of different color schemes, but I think this one works fine for this scene. I hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I will see you next time. Cheers.